you want a vision of the future, Winston, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever.
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!
Someone is trying to teach me a lesson in futility. Why am I the only one who isn't killed?
They will run you dizzy. They will pile falsehood on top of falsehood until you can't tell a lie from the truth, and you won't even want to. That's how the powerful keep their power. Don't you read the papers?
I just want to say one word to you. Just one word.
Yes, sir.
Are you listening?
Yes, I am.
Plastics.
I'm going to get your money for you. But if you don't get the President of the United States on that phone, you know what's going to happen to you?
What?
You're going to have to answer to the Coca-Cola Company.
The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business, Mr. Beale. It has been since man crawled out of the slime.
Welcome to another episode of Our Interesting Times. It is my pleasure to have Dr. E. Michael Jones back on the show. He's here to discuss a couple of articles that he has written for Culture Wars magazine. The November issue had The Fat Lady Sings, Feminism, Obesity, and Catholic Education. And in December, he penned Who Shtupped the Shiksa? Harvey Weinstein Creates Moral Panic in Hollywood. That's in the December issue. Dr. Jones, how are you doing?
Good, Jim. Good to be here.
Well, listen, thank you for coming back on the show. Of course, you are an historian, writer, editor of Culture Wars magazine, culturewars.com. You can go there and subscribe to the magazine and also purchase his many books, The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit and Its Impact on World History, The Slaughter of Cities, more recently, Barren Metal, A History of Capitalism as a Conflict Between Labor and Usury, and the most recent, The Broken Pump in Tanzania, Julius Nyerere, and the Collapse of Development Economics. And I understand you're working on another book?
Yes, I am. And I am. I think we discussed the atheism.
Yeah.
That's the first chapter in the book. That was the rise and fall. That's an attack on the new atheism that took place 10 years ago. The book is, I was going to call it the History of Logos and the Logos of History, but I don't think I can do that because nobody's going to know what Logos is. I got attacked when the SPLC attacked me. They wrote something about me. They wrote the meanest thing they could think of me, and they said he often talks about logos, which is the Latin word for reason. Shows you what geniuses they have at the SPLC. It's a Greek word. Okay, so I'm thinking of calling it. The history of rationality and the rationality of history.
Okay, yeah, that works.
That's what I'm working on now. I just finished a piece, which will be in the January issue, on Yuval Noah Harari, who wrote a book called Sapiens, which purports to be a history of everything. So meta history, what Christopher Dawson used to call meta history, it's now back in fashion.
Okay. Wow, that's rather ambitious. History of everything.
It is ambitious, and he begins with the same stupid blunder that everybody else begins with. What do you think the beginning of everything is?
The Big Bang or something?
He says, atoms formed.
Okay. We're back to that conversation.
We're back to that conversation.
That's quite a leap, isn't it? From nothing to something? That's wow.
Yeah, you know what? You can't get there from here. You can't get anywhere from nothing.
Yeah.
Nowhere. If there's nothing, you can't get anywhere. You don't exist. Nothing exists because nothing is nothing, and nothing can come from nothing. These guys never figured that out. So anyway, I'm hard at work on that right now.
Okay. When would you expect that to be released? Do you have any estimate, or is that like too far off to?
I think it'll be. I think I can. I don't know. Maybe the spring of 2018.
Oh, so this isn't 1,400 pages.
Well, you never know until you get it.
Exactly. I
never thought that. I never thought Barren Metal would end up being 1,400 pages. So the short answer to that, the honest answer is, I don't know.
I don't know. Okay. Well, that's honest. That's good. That's if more people actually would admit that, we'd have a much better world, I think, of a lot of
Honesty
things.
is the best policy.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, tonight, these two articles, The Fat Lady Sings, Feminism, Obesity, and Catholic Education. I didn't know what to expect from that title, but when I read it, it all made sense at the end. Great piece. So it starts out you discussing this Land O'Lakes statement and how the supposed independence of Catholic universities, particularly Notre Dame and even Catholic University, and how it leads into feminism and also obesity and the crisis we're facing today in the church and also in Catholic education. So what's it all about here?
Well, this is the 50th anniversary of the Land O'Lakes statement. 50 years ago, Father Hesburgh wrote a statement about Catholic education and how it needed to be independent from the church. And they published, got a bunch of Catholic educators together up in Wisconsin, the Holy Cross Priest Retreat place in Wisconsin called Land O'Lakes. And they were celebrating 50th anniversary. Notre Dame holds a celebration. Now, first, they went for their big guns here because I think deep down inside they didn't want to do it. I really don't think they wanted to do it because they know they've lost control of this narrative. So if you say Land O'Lakes to anybody who obviously in the know, who knows anything about Catholic education in this country or the history of the Catholic Church in this country, they will immediately say, yeah, that's when Hesburgh sold Catholic education down the river. That was the sellout of Catholic education. Variations on this thing. I quote that in the article. When you get somebody like Phil Gleason, who is the Dean of Catholic Historians, who is also a professor at Notre Dame, and he's saying that way, he's saying the same thing, you know that Notre Dame has lost control of the narrative. In other words, what they're trying to do here is to say with a straight face that this was an attempt to reform Catholic education. The Catholic education got better over these past 50 years, and that it was all based on Vatican II. And oh, by the way, we didn't mention at all the fact that Hesburgh placed Notre Dame under lay board of trustees. We forgot to mention that. Darn it, we forgot to mention that part, which is like, you know, oh, you forgot to introduce King Kong in this movie about the monkey here. This is what happened. I was the appointed Cardinal Kroll's biographer in the 90s, and I talked to him. He was head of the Committee to Reform the Code of Canon Law, so he knew whereof he spoke. I asked him, what did you think of Land O'Lakes? What do you think Land O'Lakes was? He said it was alienation of church property. In other words, theft. In other words, Father Hesburgh stole Notre Dame from the Catholic Church by placing it under a lay board of trustees. Now, it looked the same. It was like the classic America move. It was right out of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, you know. It looked like the same Notre Dame, but it was completely different because the pod people had come and captured Notre Dame. And at that point, it went from being a Catholic university to what it is today, which is basically a form of social engineering paid by the government subsidized by the government for the social engineering of young Catholics. In other words, to basically turn them into wage slaves, sex robots, and loyal servants of the empire. That's what it is today.
Mm-hmm.
It costs a lot of money. It's up to $60,000 a year. So for $250,000, you can have your brain washed. It's a scandal. It's a scandal that has continued for 50 years. Scandal simply in terms of the money that they charge these poor kids.
And compound interest.
Compound interest. I've done articles on that. If you want, I've done this story for 25 years, over 25 years now. There's a book called "Is Notre Dame Still Catholic?" We can sell you that book, and you can get a blow-by-blow description of 25 years of increasing degradation of the sexual, the moral, and the economic sort. Mm-hmm. So that's all in the background of this story.
And it's just because this had a direct impact on you because St. Mary's College was the women's college right before Notre Dame became co-ed. If I have that correct? Do I have that correct? And
yes. The Holy Cross priest founded Notre Dame, and then a few years later, the Holy Cross nuns arrived, and they founded St. Mary's College. And they were single-sex schools for, I don't know how long, 100 years. Let's say 100, something like that. Now, the crisis came in the 70s when Notre Dame decided to go co-ed. I think it was 72 that happened, right around that time. This precipitated a crisis for St. Mary's because before that time, it was equal. In other words, an equal cohort of Catholics went to one and went to the other. They were just divided according to gender. At this point, as soon as you let women into a place like Notre Dame, all the women with the upper echelons of, let's say, SAT scores and qualifications, they'll all go to Notre Dame. And at this point, St. Mary's becomes the loser school. Mm-hmm. And as a result, they precipitated Notre Dame, Hesburgh, precipitated an identity crisis at St. Mary's College. Now, they precipitated this identity crisis right at the moment when there's a group of ladies who are willing to solve their identity crisis for them. And these ladies are known as feminists. So it took place, the change took place at the high noon of feminism in the United States. And as I said many times before, the Holy Cross nuns were like, it was like bringing feminism to the Holy Cross nuns was like bringing whiskey to the Indians. I hope the Indians out there aren't offended by the comparison.
And this, of course, this precipitates your being dismissed from St. Mary's College.
First of all, it happened. So the nuns all became feminists. They were completely intoxicated, completely inebriated by this ideology, this alien ideology. But it was the only thing that gave them any type of identity, because we're talking about the immediate wake of Vatican II. Mm-hmm. When the orders were told to reform themselves, they didn't have a clue about what that meant. There were predators out there like Carl Rogers, who went to the Immaculate Heart nuns in Los Angeles and reformed them right out of existence. I have that story in this book as well. So they were vulnerable. Everyone was vulnerable. All Catholics were vulnerable at that point because no one knew who the predators were. Mm-hmm. The classic instance is John Courtney Murray, or in a lesser key, Malachi Martin. We thought they were both upstanding Jesuits. We thought the Jesuits were an upstanding operation. Well, it turns out that John Courtney Murray is working for the CIA and Time Life and Harry Luce, which the propaganda ministry for the CIA at that period of our history. And Malachi Martin is working for the Jews. In particular, the American Jewish Committee and B'nai B'rith, who were trying to get a document out of Vatican II exonerating the Jews from guilt for killing Christ. That was their big goal. And they spent a lot of money, and Malachi Martin was the double agent who worked for the Jews to try and get this passed during Vatican II. So it's in many ways, we're talking about the high noon of covert psychological warfare. Nobody even knows what it is. Nobody knows that the Catholic Church is a target of this type of warfare. And least of all, E. Michael Jones, who is a kind of naive graduate student in the late 70s. 1979, I received my PhD from Temple University in American Literature, got hired, moved my family out here, and, here I am. I'm on my way. I've launched my career as a professor. During I went, to show you how God works in human history. In 1978, I'd gone to Cambridge. We spent the summer in Cambridge with friends of ours whom we'd known from Germany. And I bought a folding bicycle, which was a great invention when places like the East Coast where you had trains, because you fold it up and put it on a train. So I folded up my bicycle, put it on a train, and went to New York City to the MLA convention. Walked into the room with the St. Mary's professors and plunked my bicycle down and said, okay, here I am. Let's talk about my perspectives, my prospects here. And the first question I ask is, what's the relationship between feminism and Catholicism at St. Mary's College? Good question, right? And what do they say? Where did you get that folding bicycle? And so the whole conversation is about the folding bicycle. And they thought, this guy's great. He's got a folding bicycle. And I unfolded it, and they wheeled it around the room, and you're hired. Nobody answered. This is the way God lured me out here. I asked the question. They could have said, "Oh, well, you mean you're not on board with feminism?" Well, I'm sorry. No, it was the folding bicycle that got me hired. So I get out here and I start, teaching an enormous teaching load, an absolutely crushing teaching load, which I brought 4 3-credit courses per semester. Absolutely crushing load. You couldn't do anything but just get up in the morning and go teach and come home exhausted. But I did happen to write a few editorials in the local newspaper about things like natural family planning and abortion. And basically they annoyed the faculty. So I got fired for being against for being against abortion at a Catholic college. I've told the story many times. Now, so they didn't tell me about feminism. They didn't tell me about feminism as the regnant, the operating system of St. Mary's College. That's what it was then. That's what it is today. Okay, nothing has changed. And so there's an element of constant duplicity where you're telling certain people you're more Catholic than the Pope, and you're telling other people you're more feminist than Betty Friedan. So it's the duplicity that goes on at that place. Mm-hmm. But the bigger picture was at Notre Dame, because before Hesburgh stole the university from the church, he got in bed with the Rockefellers. This is 1962. Through a priest by the name of John O'Brien. And the Rockefellers had one thing in mind at this point. John D. Rockefeller III was head of the Population Council. They wanted the world to use birth control. And not just the world, there were certain people in this world that they really wanted to use birth control, and they were the Catholics.
Yes.
Because the Catholics weren't supposed to use it. It was neck and neck between the Catholics and the Negroes. Which group was more better candidates for birth control? Margaret Sanger had done something called the Negro Project for Planned Parenthood in the 40s to get them to use birth control. But no one could crack the Catholic nut until Father Hesburgh, the traitor to his people, opened the door of the Catholic citadel from the inside and let the Rockefellers in. He did this by having a series of secret conferences at Notre Dame for 3 years. Now, this is the man who kind of thumped his chest about academic freedom at the Land O'Lakes statement. Nobody outside the universities is going to tell the university what to do unless it's John D. Rockefeller III, and he has a lot of money, and then we'll do whatever he wants, which is precisely what happened at this contraception conference. It was a secret conference. That's their word, not my word. They wanted to keep a secret from the local bishop, because if the bishop found out, he would have done something bad. So it was kept secret. You invite all of these theologians, you bribe, you know, I don't know what they did with them, you know, whatever was state of the art at that time. Take them out for steak dinner or something. Who knows? Whatever. At the end of 3 years of secret conferences, suddenly the theologians, Catholic theologians, issue a statement saying that they no longer found the church's teaching on birth control persuasive. Now, I read the articles when I did the Kroll biography. This is part of one of the big parts of that thing. You read the articles that are in the local Catholic newspaper, and as if these priests were up praying and fasting in front of the Blessed Sacrament all night, and suddenly they realized it's not persuasive anymore. No, they were paid to do this by the Rockefellers. The Rockefellers specified to Hesburgh, don't invite these priests because they're too firm in their belief that contraception's wrong. These are the books you got to put on the table. In other words, this whole thing of academic freedom at Notre Dame was totally phony, totally hypocritical. What they meant was nobody in the Catholic Church, nobody in Rome, nobody in the Vatican will tell us what to do so that we can do whatever the rich and the powerful want us to do, namely the Rockefellers, who at that time were kind of the Rockefeller foundations, were venture capitalism for their WASP ideas, and eventually it became the federal government. So that was the big context. I didn't know nobody knew this because it was a secret. Obviously, it's a secret. I had to find this out by going to the Rockefeller archives, the greatest archives that I've ever done research in. There are great people there. They're honest, straight shooters. Mr. Rosenberg there, if he's still there, helped me out a lot, and I'm grateful to him. And it was when I went there, oh, by the way, you might want to read this. Here's the Hesburgh file of the Population Council. And of course, that's where I learned all of the stuff that I'm talking to you right now. They have a file on Theodore Hesburgh there and how he betrayed the Catholic Church, the Catholic people, and the teaching against contraception for money. Money. That's what it was.
That explains his
So this is the real story. I have had some modest responsibility for getting this story out because I've been beating this drum for 30 years now, one way or the other. And the narrative has gotten out, and that's why Notre Dame was defensive. You have John McGreevy, who was their biggest star, the historian John McGreevy, who ran the whole thing, and I confronted him with this information. I just told you in a shorter version of the question at their symposium. And I said, there's all the celebration here, but haven't there been moments of subversion of Catholic teaching? Wasn't this one of them? Wasn't Notre Dame deliberately complicit in an attempt to subvert the church's teaching on contraception? And McGreevy is standing up there and he says, well, yes, there were moments of subversion. But there's lots of people subverting the place. Next question. So this is the story. They failed. They failed. Okay, they've lost control of that narrative. We know what happened now. Their story is not the true story, and all the money in the world and getting Johnny Jenkins up there to give his talk, it's not, and having his article published in America Magazine is not going to save it. It's over. They lost control. We know the story now. People know the story.
This also, I'm looking at the date, the mid-'60s, the Griswold versus Connecticut, of course, that's the Supreme Court decision establishing the right to access to contraception under the name of right to privacy. Right. That's 1965, so that's the political context to this.
That's what's happening.
Yeah.
So they're orchestrating this. It just didn't happen. Only Jewish professors from Hebrew University believe that atoms formed or shit happened.
So Griswold v. Connecticut wasn't just a coincidence?
So what happened? So first of all, we've orchestrated this. The Catholic theologians, we've strung them along for 3 years. Their statement comes out in the spring of '65. Griswold, Connecticut comes out in '65. Griswold versus Connecticut. And during the summer of '65, Hesburgh takes Rockefeller to Rome for a private audience with Pope Paul VI. And during that audience, John D. Rockefeller volunteered to write the Pope's birth control encyclical for him. Now, we would say in Philadelphia, that was mighty white of him to do that. That was mighty white of you, John. I can imagine the Pope saying that in Italian, whatever that is in Italian. The Pope declined. Humane Vitae came out in '68, and at that point, the revolution broke out into the open. There was a huge uproar at Catholic U.
Oh, that's Father Curran, Charles Curran. Yeah.
So let's go back to their attempt. What's the Notre Dame attempt? The Notre Dame narrative. The Notre Dame narrative is that Land O'Lakes flowed naturally from Vatican II. No, sorry, that's not going to fly. Okay, Vatican II was ended in, now you've got me, 65.
Yeah, 65, yeah.
Okay, so something happened right before Land O'Lakes, and what happened was the tenure battle at Catholic U, which was the dress rehearsal for the contraceptive revolution over Humane Vitae at Catholic U 1 year later. The tenure battle at Catholic U took place over the spring of 1967. Cardinal Kroll was intimately involved in this battle. The bishops are on the board. He was on the executive committee. Curran was an open scandal at Catholic U. He would go in there and he'd say, okay, so it was a room full of nuns. They were all forced by their orders to go there. And he'd say, okay, we've now talked about coitus. Now we're going to enter the vagina. Okay, and everybody bursts out laughing. Okay, nervous laughter from the nuns. Like, what is this guy? What is this horny priest talking about here? The scandal is going to the head of the president of the university. Is hearing all kinds of reports about this kind of smutty talk that Curran's involved in. And then it gets to the board of trustees, and then it gets to Cardinal O'Boyle, who is the head of the university and the Cardinal Archbishop of Washington. And he, Kroll, and Hannon, and a couple other people. This is all in John Cardinal Kroll and the Cultural Revolution. We have new copies available. It's back in print. Go out, rush out, and order a copy as soon as you hear this at culturewars.com. Anyway, the story is that tenure. Oh, it turns out Curran doesn't have tenure. Oh, well, that's interesting. As a matter of fact, he's got a 1 year renewable contract. Well, this makes it easy for us because we're just not going to renew his contract. Mm-hmm. This is Kroll's thinking here. Makes sense. They go ahead with it, and all hell breaks loose anyway. And it's all promoted by the media. Newsweek and Time are in it up to their eyeballs, talking about how the second-hand Falcon that Father Curran drives around, which makes him a saint, a living saint, because he's driving a junky car. and what happens here is the classic bishop move. The bishops back down under the pressure of the media. And at that point, they rehire. Not only do they rehire Curran, they give him tenure. A disastrous move. This is it's like the King of France or the suppressing the Jesuits. You know, you're signing your own death warrant here. And that led to the revolution of 1968. Where basically the revolutionaries took over the university. Now, it's been back and forth. Technically now, Catholic University is a Catholic university. Technically, Notre Dame is not a university. It's not listed anywhere as a university. It's a university in the mind of Notre Dame University. It's a Catholic university in their mind, and basically no one else's. The church spent Pope John Paul II spent years trying to get them back. They came up with a document called Ex Corde Ecclesiae. Father Monk Malloy, who was president at that time, wrote an article saying, no, we're going to sign it. Forget it. We'll tell you how to be Catholic. You don't tell us how to be Catholic. And he cited Hesburgh as the example that he was going to follow. So they are basically you're at this point, and this is Hesburgh had other people with him. He orchestrated basically a move on the part of many Catholic universities simply to leave the Catholic Church, put themselves under the lay board of trustees, and then become organs of social engineering for the federal government, which is what they are today, through things like Title IX. All of the titles, all the strings attached to financial aid have made them into organs of social engineering.
Yeah, so they're no different than any other university that's there to program brainwash students and cast them into deep debt so they're compliant.
Right.
So, yeah. That's and also the Catholic university. You made a point in the article that the same people that rallied around Koran getting tenure were the same people who organized the protest in response to Humana Vitae in 1968.
Right.
The theologians.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, what looks like here is the people like O'Boyle and Cardinal Kroll weren't politically savvy. They weren't aware of the black operations being carried out against the church. Like most Catholics, they're blind to the fact that they had enemies, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And they were all Americanists. Mm-hmm. I can't think of one prelate in this country who's not been an Americanist, unless you go back to the 19th century and you talk to the Germans or the Poles. The Irish were all Americanists. And on top of that, we're talking about the middle of the anti-communist crusade. And so the Catholic Church was on board because we don't like communism. We're going to help the United States fight communism while the United States is dismantling the Catholic Church. It was incredibly duplicitous on the part of people, the United States government and all the people who ran that crooked operation.
Mm-hmm. Now, in the article, you also you make a connection between this and feminism and
yes,
obesity.
Yes, President McGuire. I knew you were going to ask about that. I knew you were. So one of the ladies there at the conference at Notre Dame is Patricia McGuire, who is president of Trinity. What's it called now? Trinity University, Washington, D.C. Okay, they went through the same identity crisis that St. Mary's went through. And at a certain point in the 1980s, since they don't have Notre Dame across the street, they almost went out of business. And what Patricia McGuire did was the same thing that St. Mary's did, turned it into a feminist institution. So now I don't want to be offensive here, but this lady is morbidly obese. And we're all trying not to notice this. So when it comes to her talk, she looks like Edmund Hillary trying to go through the dead zone, getting to the top of Everest. We're moving her chair to the podium, and she's struggling. And she gets there, and we all kind of heave a sigh of relief that she finally made it to the podium. And then she opens her mouth, and then this torrent of feminism starts gushing out of her mouth. I mean, just unadulterated feminist sewage pouring from this woman's mouth. And it turns out that she's not happy with Land O'Lakes. And guess why she's not happy with Land O'Lakes? Well, because there were no women there. I mean, what was Hesburgh thinking? There were probably no homosexuals there either. No Negroes, no women, no homosexuals. I mean, what was this guy thinking? It was all white guys like him. And she goes on in this vein, and everybody's getting more and more demoralized. Now, this is a lady who won the Hesburgh Prize. Now, she must be a traitor to Catholic education if she won the Hesburgh Prize, because Hesburgh was a traitor to Catholic education. Okay, so she goes on and on and on, and then she finally finishes, and she waddles back to her seat and collapses into her chair. And everybody's feeling a little bit down because she just spent the whole time bad-mouthing Father Hesburgh, who's supposed to be the hero of this gathering. So, wait a minute. We've talked enough about feminism. As I said in the article, I mean, we all know now, after all of these years, 40 years of experience, we know that feminism makes you stupid. That's obvious if you listen to them. But the big issue now is, does it make you fat? And it turns out it does. It turns out there's a correlation between feminism and obesity, or more specifically, a correlation between lesbianism and obesity. Now, who would have thought this? Who would have thought this back then? But in a sense, why wouldn't you think this? Why wouldn't you? Because what is the point of feminism? What is the point of any form of sexual liberation? It's to say yes to appetite.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there are a couple of appetites. Sex is not the only appetite, and for some people, sex finishes a distant second to appetite for food. And that, it turns out, is like state-of-the-art feminism. And if you don't believe me, just Google Roxanne Gay, who has all of the boxes checked. She's black, she's a lesbian, she's a feminist, and she's obese. I mean, she is really obese. She in her memoir is called Hunger. I don't know why it was called that, but she weighed in at 577 pounds, top weight. So we're talking about really obese here. And so what is the point at this point of the game? Well, it seems to me that she has become the poster child of the new feminism, which is now, it's okay to be obese feminism. Because that's appetite, and it's good to say yes to appetite.
Mm-hmm. And you also make the point that by getting women out of the kitchen and abandoning the traditional roles of homemakers and making food from scratch, they became dependent on processed food and high fructose corn syrup and junk food and fast food, and this has become such home cooking has become such a lost art that an entire population, not just women, but particularly women, feminist women, lesbian women, they're just not eating healthy anymore. And so
that's right.
There's a real cost to these things. I mean, there's a real value, social value, also economic value to having a dedicated homemaker. It's a value that can't be taxed. It's a value.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
absolutely. And once again, I didn't say this. It was a feminist from London who is now the head of the London Food, whatever it is, Bureau. She's the one who said it. She's feeling remorse because in the 1970s, she was head of a feminist, she ran a feminist magazine in which she told women to leave the kitchen. Well, they left the kitchen and they went right across the street to McDonald's. And they've been stuck in McDonald's ever since. And not only that, but their children, and probably now their children's children, have been eating junk food ever since. And the result is they've all become obese. So feminism causes obesity. We know that now. It just takes a couple of generations before the fully pernicious nature of these ideologies comes to fruition.
Mm-hmm. And it throws people into the medical industrial complex because they have chronic illnesses because of their obesity and poor diets. And
yes,
yeah, So
yeah, we have a culture that allows people to get rich by victimizing other people. And the history of our lives, our lifetime, has been the decriminalization of vicious activity. And one of the groups to hustle in, the first group through the door, oftentimes, are the Jews in this regard. We already talked about the Meyer-Lansky book, okay, and the Cincinnati Ballet book. Meyer-Lansky used to be involved in what was known as criminal activity. Gambling used to be criminal activity. Now everybody's involved in it, okay? Usury used to be a crime. Now that's no longer a crime, okay? Drug dealing, dealing in drugs is still a crime if you're a certain kind of drug dealer, okay? If you're a Jewish drug dealer like Arthur Sackler and you create a drug called OxyContin, you're celebrated. You're celebrated as a great hero. And because you invariably recycle some of this money and call it philanthropy. So the entire medical school at Tel Aviv University is the Sackler Medical School. So drug money got recycled there to create doctors who then go out and prescribe OxyContin. The opioid crisis can be laid at the feet of Arthur Sackler and his family. Purdue Pharma created this thing, a horrendous epidemic that turned OxyContin into a super drug They made a drug when it was just about to expire. They came out with a dosage that was 8 times what it was before. At this point, people started grinding it up and injecting it into their veins, and we have an epidemic. Rush Limbaugh is probably the most famous OxyContin addict out there. It caught up with him. He was taking, I believe, 30 OxyContin tablets a day. How he survived that, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But you see, it's the same story across the board. Every time we're talking about liberation, it always turns out to be some form of social control. Women's liberation, no exception. Sexual liberation, they're all the same type of thing.
And thinking of a previous conversation regarding the Cincinnati Ballet, Meyer Lansky, AZT came up, and that's with Matilda Krim and her foundation.
Yeah, and that killed a lot of people. Mm-hmm. People who probably would be alive today, like Robert Mapplethorpe. Yeah. And again, here we have the paradox here. Mapplethorpe is like the cutting-edge rebel, the guy who made homosexuality mainstream through his images, turned homosexuals from creeps that would pick you up while you were hitchhiking into heroic figures through the photography that he did. And he's a rebel, except when it comes to the medical profession, and he's completely docile at that point, and he takes AZT, and the AZT kills him. I mean, there's the paradox in one person. It's the same thing across the board. You know, Hesburgh liberated Catholic University. He liberated Notre Dame University from the Catholic Church and turned it into an organ of social engineering for the federal government. The paradox appears again and again and again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course, you have the irony of it all. Ms. McGuire has I've seen this on bumper stickers. That sign, well-behaved women don't make history. And he says the irony. No, but
they get lots of money from the government, that's for sure. And what the hell does she care about making history? Mm-hmm. As long as the government grants keep pouring in and keeps her diploma mill afloat for her social engineering outlet for Catholic girls, what does she care?
Mm-hmm. Now, your next article, who Shtupped the Shiksa? Harvey Weinstein creates a moral panic in Hollywood.
What kind of Jew are you, anyway? You can't even pronounce the word. It's Shiksa.
Is it Shiksa? How do you pronounce that?
No, Shiksa.
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 Shiksa. Okay. I'm sorry.
Oy vey, Tim. Can't even pronounce the word right. What kind of Jew are you?
Anyway,
it's who Shtupped the Shiksa.
There you go. You got it. Okay, I'll let you say it. Anyway, I know the concept. I'm familiar with the concept because maybe perhaps that's the most important. But the idea of it. Harvey Weinstein. Okay, you've wrote this long piece about it, and well, you take on Hollywood, the establishment in Hollywood, and apparently the mainstream media has discovered the casting couch, and they're outraged. They're shocked. They're shocked.
Shocked. They're like Claude Rains in Casablanca. I'm shocked.
But you point out Harvey Weinstein is more of a sort of an archetype, a cultural archetype, which is
he's a scapegoat.
Yeah,
I think that this is, in other words, I mean, why did I come up with this Yiddish title? First of all, Shtupp, it means to have sex with, mm-hmm. And Shiksa is the Jewish word for a Gentile woman. So who screwed the Gentile woman? Okay, if you don't view this through the Jewish lens, you're not going to understand it. It's that simple. So the first thing you have to understand is Jewish religion, and Jewish religion believes in the scapegoat. And the scapegoat is there to die for the sins of the people. This was the Old Testament. The Jews used to do this, and they cast all their sins onto the goat, and they killed the goat, and then they were relieved of their sins. Okay, well, these Jewish habits die hard, and what you saw in Hollywood was the same thing. Here, Steven Spielberg is the high priest. Let those among you without sin cast the first stone, you might say here. They're full of biblical references. And what does Steven Spielberg say? He says it's better for one man to die than for the people to perish. Now, who are the people here? Well, it's Hollywood. So in some way, shape, or form, Harvey Weinstein was offered up as a sacrificial scapegoat for the sins of Hollywood in order to preserve Hollywood in existence, keep the thing going. Hollywood is in trouble. We know it's in trouble. Lots facing competition from Netflix and all these other operations that are basically stealing their lunch. They're the ones who are producing the top-rate films these days, not Hollywood. So that was an attempt, and by now it should be obvious. It failed. It failed miserably. What happened was we had a moral panic in its place. At certain points in history, the psychological pressure builds up in a population, and when they can't stand it anymore, something like a moral panic breaks out. Something like the Salem witch trials were a moral panic in New England. It often has to do with the inability to confess your sins, the absence of sacramental confession in a culture will lead to these outbursts because the load of guilt gets at a certain point, it becomes unbearable, and some type of psychological outburst has to take place. I think that's what happened here.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think that there was lots of psychological pressure, lots of shame, lots of sexual guilt. And it had been going on, and it showed no signs of stopping. I mean, it's just going to go on and on and on and on, no signs of stopping, and everybody just snapped at one point. And the ones who snapped first were the ladies. The ladies, I said at another point, I started to feel sorry for Harvey because the standard story was that the starlet goes into his hotel room thinking she's going to make changes to the script. Harvey, why are you laughing? Why are you laughing? It turns out Harvey has something else on his mind. At this point, he makes his move. The starlet smacks him in the face and says she's shocked that a gentleman would do something like this. And she walks out, and Harvey shouts, "She'll never work in this town again." I found that implausible. I just found that implausible. And it turns out that the ladies, I mean, lots of people were having sex. I started to feel sorry for him. I felt he was the only guy in Hollywood who couldn't get laid. But it turns out that lots of women were doing this. And not only that, it turns out that there are all sorts of other people who are doing the same thing. It's a pandemic. It's not Harvey Weinstein. It wasn't just a lone deranged gunman. It was all kinds of people. It was everybody doing it. And the women were, I mean, I hate to say this, but I mean, they were no paradigm of chastity themselves, were they?
No, that's not the impression I get. No.
The classic instance of this is the moral indignation of Kate Winslet. Well, Kate, what were you doing? What did you do? How did you collaborate with Harvey? Well, you did The Reader, which is a Holocaust film, okay? But it's also Holocaust porn, it turns out. And not only that, it's Holocaust child pornography. Because the whole thing of this movie is you as a 35-year-old woman having sex with a 15-year-old boy. That's the whole premise of the movie. Well, suppose it were a 35-year-old man and a 15-year-old girl. Would that make a difference? Well, yeah, we would be shocked at that. But somehow, well, what's the difference? Well, the difference is the Holocaust. Because you can do that kind of stuff and you get away with it as long as it's in a Holocaust movie. The Holocaust has been the biggest justification for sex and nudity on the screen for the past 50 years, over 50 years now. And I'm not exaggerating. The classic, it was Holocaust porn that broke the production code. The movie was The Pawnbroker, 1965. Hollywood, the Catholics had beaten down, had brought the Jews in line in 1933 after the boycotts in Philadelphia of Warner Brothers theaters. The Jews had to go along because the Catholics threatened to spread those boycotts to every other big city, and that would have ruined Hollywood. That would have destroyed Hollywood. It's a shame they didn't, but they didn't do it. Hollywood signed the production code, and for 31 years, Joe Breen and his two successors had control over the films that came out of Hollywood. Now, they weren't tyrants. Joe Breen, everybody in Hollywood loved Joe Breen. He was easy to get along with, and it was very clear-cut and very simple. No nudity, no blasphemy, no ridiculing the clergy. And there were other weird things, too, like no black and white together. They had to somehow get along with the sensibilities of the Southerners. But in many ways, it worked for 31 years. And then the Jews came up with the nuclear weapon, namely Holocaust porn, the pawnbroker, and that destroyed the production code. And that opened the way to the pornography culture that we have today, which is also Jewish. Mm-hmm. So this is the way the Jews beat the Catholic Church and beat down community standards of decency. That simple.
One thing that Joe Breen, he has a famous quote about Hollywood being full of degenerates, and they're all Eastern European and they're mostly Jewish. He was able to identify the ethnic component, just sort of the sexualization or attempted sexualization of American culture, and that's something that's been deprived us. We've been deprived that grammar because of the Holocaust. Because if you notice that,
right.
Yeah, because you're accused of being a Nazi if you make that accusation.
Anytime you say something of this sort that I just said, you will be accused of being an anti-Semite. Mm-hmm. This is the way that they shut down, the Jews shut down every single argument and justify their destruction. That's how they justify their destruction of the social and moral order as we know it, as we used to know it. We've already talked about it. One by one, we decriminalize pornography. We decriminalize usury. We decriminalize gambling. We decriminalize the certain drugs. Okay, the society is in ruins as a result of this, and we can't even say who did it. The church completely crippled, and probably there's probably a causal connection between things like the Land O'Lakes statement and the situation in the church today. Yeah. Because in a sense, the Catholic Church was decapitated. The Catholic intellectuals were taken out. It's like Cambodia. Anybody who wore glasses got taken out and shot. Well, the Catholic intellectuals got co-opted by government money. And so you're not going to find John McGreevy saying things of the sort that I am saying right now. No. His job is to confirm the official narrative. And as a result, he committed suicide as a historian, sad to say. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in pursuit of ecumenical outreach and dialogue, the church sort of lets itself completely exposed to this sort of infiltration and outflanking because it no longer recognizes it as enemies anymore.
That's right.
Yeah. Identifiable enemies,
That's right.
Yeah.
When did Jesus Christ ever say we would have no enemies? I missed that passage. He said you're going to have enemies. And he said the Jews are going to be your enemies. This is St. Paul. This is the gospel of the Catholic Church. St. Paul said in 1 Thessalonians 2, the Jews are the people that killed Christ. They are enemies of the entire human race. Well, has something changed since then? No. Yes, what has changed is we now have empirical proof that they are enemies of the entire human race. Look at Israel. Look at all of the industries that we talked about in the United States. Look at the United States. Mm-hmm. Has become a pariah now that the Jews have taken it over. The Jews completely control our foreign policy, and the Catholics are completely helpless, completely disarmed. They can't even address the problem. They can't even think in these lines. You probably have people lining up in front of the confessional if they had this thought that I just expressed.
Yeah,
I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah,
tell me I'm exaggerating.
No, you're outside the realm of legitimate. You're outside the canon of thought that you're allowed to think, and you can't express these things. You don't even have the language to express these things anymore. And people,
because you abandon the language of the gospel. Just go to the gospel. If you think it's all hunky dory, what did St. Peter say? when he went to Jerusalem. He said, you killed Christ. But he said, you still have a chance. You can be baptized. And if you're baptized, you can be saved. St. Paul said they're the enemies of the entire human race.
But the church articulated as sort of a modus vivendi with Jewish people centuries ago, right? And they said the Jew cannot be molested, but also the Jews can't corrupt culture.
That's called Secret Deus Non. I talk about that in detail in the Jewish Revolutionary Spirit. Yes, you're right. Yeah. And they abandoned it. They abandoned it at Vatican II.
Because in America, for the most part, Jews are free. They're free like everyone else, but then again, they haven't kept their end of the bargain because of places like Hollywood. They've used it to destroy, corrupt the culture. And I think you wrote in the article, you go, the Catholic Church didn't realize as soon as it lost control or some sort of restraining power on Hollywood, the instruments of popular culture or culture would be directed right against her. And that's exactly what happened.
So guess what? Guess there are two kinds of film that Harvey Weinstein produces. Holocaust films and anti-Catholic films.
Mm-hmm. There's Priest, 40 Days and 40 Nights, Inglourious Bastards. You list them.
I list them all in the article.
Mm-hmm.
And what did Joe Green say? The kind of hero of this story. He said, these people are the scum of the earth. They're all Eastern European Jews who can think of nothing but sex and money. And then the punchline, and the film fare of the nation should not be left in the hands of people like this.
Mm-hmm.
Truer words were never spoken. Mm-hmm. That's where we are right now. And how are we going to deal with it?
And yet it has. Well, again, real understanding of history and also the ethnic component is important because it explains so much of the behavior. It's like they have this goes back to the shtetl culture, correct? There's sort of this antipathy towards the larger Christian community. These things. So when they emigrated, they brought it with them. They brought with them their radicalism and their contempt for the host culture. So it's a problem that has to be dealt with, at least acknowledged. You mentioned in the article, like Harvey Weinstein, of course, he's a sexual predator supposedly, and he's this horrible man. But he's also a philanthropist. Gives lots of money, and that's very important, right?
So what's the transaction here? Yeah. It's kind of the Meyer-Lansky, the Mo Dalitz transaction. In other words, Mo calls up to the ADL and says, "Listen, I'll give you $100,000 if you give me your Torches of Liberty award." Okay, Mo, you got it. So Harvey calls up Rabbi Marvin Hier at the Simon Wiesenthal Center and says, "I'll give you $100,000 if you give me your Humanitarian of the Year award." Done, Harvey. And so they gave him that award in 2015. And now Rabbi Hier is saying, "I didn't know. Oh my, he was doing what? I didn't know." Well, everybody else knew, Rabbi. You did, or was it the $100,000 that he gave you that changed your mind all of a sudden? There's complete hypocrisy. And but what comes through here is, well, wait a minute. You gave him the award because he was being a good Jew. That's why you gave him the award. And what did he say when he received the award? We got to go out and kick the anti-Semites' ass. Well, who's that? Well, it's people like me. Mm-hmm. This guy has a license to go after people like me because he doesn't like what I'm saying. Who gave him this license? Well, Rabbi Marvin gave him that license because he's only being a good Jew by doing this. And how else do you know he's a good Jew? What does a good Jew do? He hates people. This is Rabbi Meyer Solvachik. The article was in First Things, the Neocon magazine. Rabbi Solvachik says hate is a Jewish virtue. What is the other Jewish virtue? Well, it's, to get back to our beginning here, Shtupping the Shiksa is a Jewish virtue. Let's not kid ourselves. If you don't take my word, read Philip Roth. Read the novels of Philip Roth, if you can stomach them. And you'll realize that behind closed doors, the Jews would pat each other on the back for what they considered virtuous behavior, namely Shtupping the Shiksa, because Shtupping the Shiksa is fun, okay, to begin with, but it's also an expression of hatred for the Goyim, which is also a Jewish virtue.
Mm-hmm. And because that Portnoy's complaint inspired Woody Allen's Annie Hall, correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's not just one guy. This is an ethos that these people share. And there's one Philip Roth novel where he's talking about it himself. And he says, he'd like to kill these girls going to church because they may be Himmler's daughters. I mean, this is sick. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is really sick. And yet Philip Roth is celebrated as this great novelist. If you did it, they accuse you of hate crimes. But Philip Roth does it, and they give him awards. And that's the whole, you can't understand this whole thing unless you understand it through the lens of Jewish behavior and use the proper vocabulary, which is shtupping the Shiksa.
Well, this is funny because even I think Larry David was compelled to at least allude to it he had a Saturday Night Live monologue.
Yeah, it's a classic double standard. Yeah. Larry David does it on Saturday Night Live, and everybody claps, and what a naughty boy he was, and nothing happens. I say it, and it's terrible. I'm an anti-Semite. Wait a minute, we're saying the same thing. We're both saying the same thing. We need to put an end to this double standard.
Well, just like when you say that you acknowledge that Jews largely control Hollywood, and therefore they have to take some collective responsibility. If they can take collective credit for its influence, Neil Gaiman can write his book, Empire of Their Own, and say the same thing, but you say it, you're an anti-Semite.
Yeah, he writes a book about how Jews control Hollywood, how they created Hollywood. And then William Cash, an Englishman, says in an article, and he calls him an anti-Semite for saying exactly the same thing that he said. Mm-hmm. This is intolerable. I'm sorry. This is not discourse. Discourse cannot survive in an atmosphere like this. We have to break this taboo. We have to shatter this taboo. This has to be our crusade, and this is why we need to keep doing what we're doing here.
There's some shared responsibility here, because I don't want to come off as always try to play the victim. Okay, the Jews have their culpability in this. The Jews who run Hollywood, these moguls and the people who run Hollywood and exploit people. But you have millions and millions of Americans who let Hollywood affect them, influence them. You have these young girls who go out there and search this sort of satanic search for stardom, and they're willing to sell themselves. And you have these sex objects become these raging feminists. The psychological reasons are easy to find out. The guilt. You make the point about guilt producing shamelessness and these things. That's a good point you made. Yeah.
Guilt leads to shame. Ever since Adam and Eve, if you take your clothes off, you feel shame. Okay, so here are young ladies taking their clothes off deliberately so that they get the part in the movie. And then when they get the movie, they take their clothes off. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you build this pool of shame. And as I said before, the psychological pressure becomes unbearable. So what's the cure for shame or guilt? Well, you can go to confession, honey. But no, you don't want to do that because you want to keep doing what you're doing because you want to be a star. So then the only cure for shame then is shamelessness. And so it turns out that every woman that accused Harvey Weinstein, every woman listed in that New Yorker article that finally broke the story, they all had sex tapes. Rose McGowan has a sex tape. Well, wait a minute. What are you doing here? What is the point of the sex tape? Well, you're trying to be shameless here as the cure for your shame. I said the classic example is the gay pride parade. Mm-hmm. Why do you do that? Well, because they're full of shame, because they're doing unspeakable, disgusting things to each other, and the pressure gets unbearable. So you go out in public and you parade around in your jockstrap, and God didn't kill you, and so therefore it must be okay.
Mm-hmm. And and these women playing the victim, of course, they're willingly want to become actors and become stars and compromise themselves, but they're not willing to accept any responsibility for their part in degrading American culture. That's
right.
Yeah. That's right. Because you could say the sex tape, of course you have the sex tape which gets leaked. Yeah, right.
We'll get some mysterious leak here. How come every sex tape gets leaked?
Gets leaked. But the movies they make themselves are kind of sex tapes because...
Well, they are sex tapes. I mean, they're R-rated sex tapes.
Yeah.
The Reader, with Kate Winslet, should win the kind of Hypocrite of the Year award for attacking Harvey Weinstein when she did The Reader. Mm-hmm. And it's an Academy Award. Because I think she said this. I hope this doesn't get us bumped off the air, but she said, "Now I've done my fucking Holocaust movie." I remember her saying this. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's her quote. Okay, she's got this sense of shame, I think. And so she tries to unload it all on Harvey. She switches. If you notice the cover of the magazine, there she is with her arm around Harvey because Harvey got her an Oscar. Now he's going down. Now she's going to jump on the other side of the bandwagon.
Yeah, I mean, it's the moment they can't get anything more out of him, they abandon him. I'd almost respect someone if someone was sticking by him. At least, it's like it's so opportunistic, it's obvious. But yeah, all these women, whether it's the victim of Al Franken's pranks or antics when he's faking like he's fondling that girl on the airplane. She's the topless model. There's this complaints of Jenny McCarthy, who was a Playboy playmate. Millions of people, hundreds of millions, have seen her naked. She hosted Singled Out on MTV, which was the purpose of the job was to debase college-age kids in front of millions of people. And then she's complaining about Steven Seagal's crude come on. It's a little hypocritical. I mean, it doesn't justify the behavior of these men, but there's another. It takes two to tango, and there's a dialectic here, and these women have to have some responsibility. These are, what used to be called like scarlet women. They're corrupting. There to not seduce, but to arouse and provoke bad male behavior. And they have a role in this. Obviously the men are responsible for their behavior, but there's another angle to this. I don't buy this feminist. Feminist psychodrama that you call it. It's a feminist.
I did not buy it at all. You read the article, you know how I began it.
Yeah.
Okay. But so what is the big picture here? I think the big picture is, especially when we get to somebody like Matt Lauer and Charlie Rose, the regime is losing the best propaganda machine in human history. Mm-hmm. They lost two of their best salesmen. The credibility of the machine is going down. Going down.
Yeah, it also shows how something like sex, how the pornographic culture, the over-sexualization of American culture, it arrests development. Meaning, you have older men who should be mature, and this is the type of behavior you might expect in a 20-year-old male. But you would think by the time people reach their 50s and 60s,
or
70s, that they have just
or 90s
or 90s. Exactly, I have sort of
George Bush.
Yes, I know.
Feeling up some girl from his wheelchair.
Yes, a young girl who does multiple nude scenes on movie. Yeah, another one who's done nude scenes. Lynn, I think is her name, Heather Lynn. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you would think, but this is what it does. It makes everyone look like fools. Eventually, right?
No fool like an old fool.
Yeah. Which is that, what's that? You mentioned that play from Euripides, right? With the king.
Bacchae, the Pentheus, and the Bacchae loses all of his authority.
Mm-hmm. Because of sex, ultimately, because of sex.
But the flip side is that the regime is losing its authority. Mm-hmm. It's losing its moral authority, and I don't think there's any way to stop it now. I don't know we don't know where we're headed. No. And we don't know but I think this is the way God moves in human history. Mm-hmm. He's not going to prohibit human freedom. He's going to allow human freedom, the people to take their freedom as far as they want to take it, into complete bondage, slavery, and control. But he's not going to lose control of history because of their wickedness. They will bring about the very thing that they least suspect they want to bring about. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well, Michael, I've had you here for a little over an hour. I think we covered it, right? The two I think at least the crux of the two articles. I encourage people to go out and get those editions of Cultural magazines or subscribe to the magazine and read the articles. They're great articles.
Thank you.
And also to go to your website and get those books. You say the Cardinal Kroll book is now available?
The Cardinal Kroll book is back in print, based on the archives of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia.
Okay.
First, really crucial documents, and the archives got closed after my book came out. But that's another story. The whole story of Philadelphia, another story. But it's back in print.
Okay, that's Cardinal Kroll and the Cultural Revolution, the Catholic Church?
Yeah, Cardinal Kroll and the Cultural Revolution. You get it at culturewars.com.
Okay, great. Well, I'll let you go. I want to thank you. I want to wish you a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Same to you, Tim. And always a pleasure to be with you.
A pleasure to have you on, and we'll be in touch maybe earlier next year when something else comes up. And I'll let you go, and thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
They said there'll be snow at Christmas, and they said there'll be peace on earth. But instead it just kept on raining, a veil of tears for the virgin birth. And I remember one Christmas morning, winter's light and a distant choir, and the peal of a bell, and that Christmas tree smell, and your eyes full of tinsel and fire. They sold me a dream of Christmas, and they sold me a silent night, and they told me a fairy story till I believed in the Israelite, and I believed in Father Christmas, and I looked to the sky with excited eyes. Then I woke with a yawn in the first light of dawn, saw him and through his disguise. I wish you a hopeful Christmas, I wish you a brave new year. All anguish, pain and sadness, leave your heart and let your road be clear. They said there'd be snow at Christmas, they said there'd be peace on earth. Hallelujah, Noel, be it heaven or hell, the Christmas we get we deserve. Christmas, everybody.